Water Review. Hi everyone, welcome to another wonderful Wednesday science experiment. So before we start with the evaporation experiment, I wanted to just take a minute to talk a little bit about water because this is the last week that we're really going to be talking too much about water, and now we're going to be starting to talk a lot more about air. We are going to keep doing the evaporation experiment because I'm pretty interested to see what happens. And so before we get to this week's results, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the answers that people sent in to last week's questions. So one of the first things I asked you was to come up with some living things in our community that need water. And so some answers that some of the students in our class sent in were foxes, dogs, wolves, fish, beavers, trees, cactuses, and cats are all things that need water to live. And in fact, we know that all living things need water. And because of that, we need to make sure that we're taking care of the water in our community. So I also asked you to think of some ways that you can help to take care of the water in our community. And some really great answers that I got were things like taking shorter showers. And really anything that we can do to use less water is a way that we can help to protect the water. We can also make sure our taps don't leak, and we can make sure that we don't litter in or around the water to help make sure that the things that live in the lakes and the rivers and the streams near our community can stay healthy. Okay. So now is the time we've all been waiting for. Evaporation experiment. It's time to check the results of our evaporation experiment. So before we measure how much water is left in each container today, I wanted to review our results from last week. So thank you to everybody who solved those tricky math questions. That was really helpful for me figuring out exactly how much water we had in both containers. So here is our updated graph. And just to remind you, the pink bars show the covered container of water. And we can see that they're kind of staying almost the same every week. We had 250 milliliters when we started in that covered container. We had 250 milliliters the second week that we checked. And last week we had just a little bit less. We had 248 milliliters of water, which means that 2 little milliliters evaporated from that container. Then we can look at the green bars, and they show us how much water is in the uncovered container. So we started out just like we did in the covered container with 250 milliliters of water, but our green bar is getting smaller every week. That means that there's less and less water in that container each time we measure it. So after 1 week, there was 180 milliliters of water left in our uncovered container. And after 2 weeks, there was only 115 milliliters of water left in our container. Now, we're going to measure how much there is this week, and I think it's going to be even less. So let's start out with our uncovered container. So I'm going to pour the water from our uncovered container into my measuring cup. And I'm going to pour that into our graduated cylinder. Oh wow, it didn't even fill up 1 graduated cylinder's worth of water. So there's about 50 milliliters of water in that container. I'm just going to grab my whiteboard so I can write down our result. All right, so I've got my whiteboard and I'm going to write down our results for our uncovered container. And we don't even have to do any math to figure out how much water is left in that one this week. We know that there is just 50 milliliters of water. Okay, I'll pour the water back in that container. And let's measure how much is left in the covered container. Now, when I look at the saran wrap, I can actually see, I think, a little bit of water vapor or condensation, drops of water on the inside of that saran wrap. So that's kind of interesting. I'm going to pour all that water into my measuring cup. Okay, and we'll use our graduated cylinder. So there's 100 milliliters of water. Two 100 milliliters of water. And about 40 milliliters of water. Pretty interesting. 100 milliliters plus 100 milliliters plus 40 milliliters. Okay, so here are our results from this week. Now, I'm wondering if you can help me figure out a few things this week. First of all, for our uncovered container, we already know how much water was left in that one. We don't have to do any math. There's 50 milliliters. So I'm wondering if you can figure out how much water has evaporated. Now remember, we started with 250 milliliters in both containers. I'll write that at the top. Okay, we started with 250 milliliters and there's 50 milliliters left. In our covered container, we have 100 milliliters plus 100 milliliters plus 40 milliliters. So I'm wondering if you can, first of all, figure out how much water is left in the covered container. Then, can you figure out how much is evaporated? It's a bit of a tricky question because we need to take a couple steps, but you guys have been doing such a good job with all of the math questions I've been sending you that I think you're going to be able to handle it. All right, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see how much water is left next week, although actually I have one more question for you. I'm wondering if you can make a hypothesis. Do you think there will be any water left in the uncovered container next week, or do you think it will be all gone? All right, see you next week.